a Saturday, and this exhibition will close tomorrow. Um, we're in the Shanghai Public Library, and I have with me my two partners, William and Powell, and I have with me a friend and a journalist, Russell Flannery. And I just wanted to say thank you to the library for allowing us this space, and thank you to Shui on Land for helping sponsor this exhibit. All the works of this exhibit will be donated to the library for their archives. And I think that's an important contribution to that one day when people are researching Xintiandi, which I hope is going to be around a while, they'll be able to go back and see where the ideas came from and who. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about, as we walk around, this is what it looked like when I first, I believe that's Wang Pinan Lu, and I'm pretty sure it is. And I'm not sure why they painted the first 2 or 3 meters white, but they did. And so those buildings were not that difficult to restore because they still had the original window openings, still had the original brickwork. Of course, we had to get the paint off. And here's a great picture of the long alley. And I believe at the end we're looking towards the house number 1, we call it. But you can see that there was today it's all paved with bricks and stones, but in 1998 it was all concrete. In some cases it was just dirt. So, and everybody had this is the back of the next one. This is the front of a 3-stone door, a shukuman. And at the back, they had only cold water, one of these basins for each house. And they would wear the handle around their waist so that no one else could turn on their water. So you could tell where they lived by the kind of handle they had. And I learned that the first time on my first day, I had my guide. I said, "Why are they all wearing handles?" They said, so somebody else can't use their water. So, and of course, this today looks like this. And that's the house number 1. And sometimes we took the liberty to make a big opening. This is not original. But since it was going to be adaptively reused, it was going to go from residential to food and beverage and commercial entertainment. We made the decision to make some of the openings larger. And we also had to dig up the whole alleyways. These are covers, and there's a big trench down there that has all the utilities and the internet, and so it's all underneath. So all the wires are gone, and then we purposely chose a very inexpensive light fixture, because I want the light to come from the shop fronts, not from the, it's much more romantic. Other architects probably would have put a big light, and some lighting engineer would come in here and say it's not light enough. So I did have a guy who said that, and I got rid of him. So these are all pictures of what it was like. I actually met several of these people. That was a member of the studio. He was. We had both Singaporean Chinese and a couple of people from my Boston office, He was actually from Beijing, but he had worked in the Singapore office because we had to do all the drawings in China. That was one of the stipulations, was that my Boston office was not to work on the project. They wanted the project all done right here in Shanghai. So, and then that's actually a quote. It's part me and part Wim Wenders. And it's very poignant because, you know, today 600 million people live in Chinese cities. And everyone has their own identity. And, you know, it's like part of who you are is where you live. And so we live wherever we can. We are whoever we are. And so that's my attempt at being a little bit poetic. This is a photograph that was taken in early May of 1998. It was taken about a week after I arrived in Shanghai. I actually came for one day, was offered the job. I was told I needed to come back in a week. And that's why I went to Singapore to get my staff, because they were bilingual. They were Singaporean and Chinese. So they both spoke English. They were good architects. They were used to working with foreigners. Today, my two partners, mainland Chinese, as is all the rest of our staff. So you can appreciate that. I mean,
I'm the only American in our
anyway, this is the this is where the bomb shelter was, and I tried to save that building. This is where Starbucks is today, and this building just one day just fell down. So tried not to put it back. But some of the buildings were in terrible shape. Here's where the bomb shelter was, see? And the walls were about 5 feet thick. And there were pictures of Chairman Mao painted on the walls. And during the Cultural Revolution, every neighborhood had to build a bomb shelter. Do you remember that, Mr. Flannery?
Yeah, yeah, I remember this story.
Anyway, we were told the only way to get this out was to dynamite it. And we thought if we dynamited it, it might further damage the building. So we made the decision just to fill it up with rubble. So if you went out to the fountain, where the fountain is, basically where Fountain Square is, and if you dug down, you would still find the bomb shelter. It's still there. And,
Have you given any thought to doing that?
no. But maybe one day some archaeologists will do that. See, here's where it's been filled in. That was that hole. So you can see that. You can also see the Dutch influence. Even though it was largely done by French architects, they used this gambrel roof, which is very Dutch. So you can see the Western influence. This was in pretty good shape. It's not the house number one. It's on the opposite end of the block. It's where Tom Dixon has a shop now. It's been through several owners, but there's the hole where the bomb shelter was, and there it is being filled in. That's where you enter off the corner of Madanglu and Taikanglu, yeah. This is the very narrow alley, the narrowest alley in Xintiandi. So the hardest part about working on this project was deciding which buildings to take away. Normally when you're given a job as an architect, you're given a clean site and your job is to decide where you're going to put the building. And that's called additive. This was what we known as subtractive. You had to subtract certain buildings to make space. And that was an agonizing decision because having never done a project like this, I had to sort of guess whether it worked or not. But eventually we decided that would be the main, and in the end we actually took this building down. Originally I was going to leave that one there, and that's the one that fell down. And then a piece of that building fell down one day. We put that back. We didn't put this back. That's where Starbucks is. That little narrow wedge is where our studio is. So that's a very important comparison between. And the other thing that was very difficult about this project was there were no drawings of the buildings, and we didn't have time to do them. And you couldn't get far enough away from them to photograph them. So in the next room, you'll see what we did. We made collages. Let's go to the next room. This is a very, of course, remember this is 1998, so the tools available to architects were much more limited than they are today in terms of 3D modeling. So building a 3D model was not an option either, because it would have taken thousands of hours. But Photoshop was about 4 years old. And I was working on Times Square, and I'd learned how to do collages, where you take a picture and then you Photoshop in what you want. Like in the case of Times Square, it was billboards. And you can see as you look, that's what it looks like, and then you slowly add the elements. And then when you end up, it's been transformed. So I call this process, visible transformation. And we still use this today. It was very effective in explaining to which was then Luan District, the process. They couldn't, it's hard to have professional bureaucrats imagine things. That's not what they've been trained to do. So you have to help them imagine things. And these were very effective. So there's a whole series of them. My family. That's me when I was 50 years old. My son was about 15. My daughter was about 20. That's my former wife. So I put people in them. I put color on them. So you start with something like that, and then you make it look. And the trees were very important. I don't think people understand how important trees are. Trees are the living ceiling of a beautiful space. And I tell my partners that every day. If you're on a tall building looking down on a community, you should see no streets. The streets should be so full of trees you can't find them, except in the winter when the leaves fall off, and then you want the sun. And then, these are not my sketches. I had that guy from Singapore made these. He was very handy at sketching. So he would take some of my collages and then turn them into sketches. That's actually the final design. So you can see, if you remember the other picture, you can see where it goes through. And then we slipped in a couple of modern pieces. We didn't tell anybody about them. So that's the sketch that then was converted into today they would call that positioning. In other words, but I called it, I'm not even sure what I called it.
Merchandising type.
Merchandising, that's what we call it. You're right. And then this was all done in 1998, July. So 2 months after starting the project, I almost knew where we wanted everything to go. And today it's not so different. There's a fountain where the fountain is. There's a gateway. There's Chinese restaurants. There's international cuisine. I was told when I started work on this project by the local Shui staff that Chinese people would never eat outside unless it was on a sidewalk. And those are poor people. So he said only poor people eat outside. So why are you designing all these outdoor spaces? And I said, because I want to sit outside. And if I sit outside, everybody else will want to sit outside. So, you know. These are all the final drawings. You can see the modern pieces, which we, and even today, when we do a project, I insist that even if we're using old materials and using some of the vernacular, or what we call non-pedigree architecture, in other words, an architect didn't do it. That's called non-pedigree. I always insist that we do something that reflects the current generation, so that if you just fix up old buildings and copy old buildings, that your generation didn't contribute. You borrowed everything from the past generation. So it's important that each generation be remembered. And so that's why these little modern pieces are important, you know. Don't have to be a lot of them, but enough that you know that somebody was, in 1998, there were buildings that weren't there that are now modern. So. That's the elevation on the street, Tai Kung Lu. And this was I'm not going to say a whorehouse, but that's pretty much what it was. It was a brothel. And each of these represented one room. So, and we basically had to rebuild it. It was in such bad shape. But this building was in pretty good shape. It took a lot of restoration, but this was owned by an opium dealer. And because even then, you weren't supposed to, I wouldn't say dealing with opium was illegal, but it certainly wasn't considered a respectable profession. So he had a brush maker's shop. So he claimed he was a brush maker, when all along he was an opium dealer. Only opium could have built something this beautiful. And of all the people that lived in these neighborhoods during the French concession, he was the only Chinese guy, he and his family. All the other Lilong were built for foreigners. And then after World War II, they were, in the Revolution, they were, of course, all the foreigners left and people moved in. But that was built for a Chinese opium dealer. He also had the only automobile, and his garage is behind it. And there used to be an opening right here. This is a transformer room, but before that there was a driveway leading to the garage, and he had the only car in this whole part of Shanghai. So don't know his name, but and when we got here, there were 17 families living in that house, all sharing one kitchen, and there was no indoor facilities for sanitary facilities.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, but my first time to Shanghai, I smelled it before before I saw, I could smell it.
Yeah.
It was about middle of May, so it was warm. When I was 5 blocks from Xintiandi, I could smell it. And I was there early in the morning. They were taking out the night soil, and then they would sell it to the farmers for fertilizer. It was a money-making proposition. So human whatever was dumped on vegetables. They're still doing it, but I guess that's okay. We won't spend a lot of time here, but those are prints. But we will go down here and recognize Mr. Vincent Lowe. This is a very recent drone shot. And I've never been able to convince them to put trees there, but we were able to get lots of trees here, and now they're fully covering the street. See, you can see real well here. These were made from a drone, and that's the man responsible for this entire project known as Xintiandi. He's the same age as me. I think I'm 1 month older. So we were and without his vision and support, there would be no Xintiandi. And he's still active, and I'm still active, and we're working on projects with his company today. So Mr. Flannery can do a story when the Panlong 10D opens up. And we've applied for a UNESCO Heritage Award for one of our projects, and hopefully Mr. Flannery can write up a nice story about getting the UNESCO Heritage Award. Very difficult for anybody to get a project listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We tried with Xintiandi, but back then they had a slightly different set of criteria, and one of them was you couldn't make money. So they considered Xintiandi too commercial to be eligible for the award. But they've changed now, realizing that places need to make money so they get properly maintained and they have a longer life. So now when you do a major renovation, you're allowed to make money and still eligible for the award.
What was Vincent's insight at that time then?
Well, he had hired a major U.S. firm to do a master plan of the whole area known as Taiping Chow. And then they asked him, they said, can we do the 2 city blocks that next to the ETA, the first Congress Hall? And so they spent a year on a design, and they tore down all the buildings. And I'm not sure even to this day what changed Vincent's mind, but he told me, he said, I looked at work they did, and he said, I had a gut feeling that we shouldn't tear their buildings down. But I can't get anybody to agree with me, not even my board of directors. They said, tear them all down. And he said, you're the only one that agrees with me. So when they voted for the architect who was going to replace the big American firm, they interviewed 5 architects. There were 7 people voting. I got 1 vote, Mr. Lowe's vote. And the other 6, until it was finished and making money, they kept telling Vincent, you've made a huge mistake. Mr. Wood is crazy. He's going to lose all your money.
So what do you hope the legacy of the project will be then?
Well, the legacy is already in evidence all over China. Now, historic neighborhoods are considered to have some intrinsic value. And so, and particularly now that our president has endorsed the idea of, he said no more weird buildings. And he was referring to buildings like the CCTV building and some of a famous Israeli woman's artwork. He says we need buildings that ordinary people can appreciate. And so the legacy is that anybody can come to Xintiandi. It's not like a shopping mall where you have to pass a phalanx of luxury stores and security. When you go into a shopping mall, you behave different. There's a book called Shout in the Street, and it's my favorite book on. It's not really on architecture. It's on the sort of experience of living in cities. And what it means is that you're free to shout in the street, and no one's going to chastise you for it. So that's why the legacy of Xintiandi is it's a place where ordinary people can go and make choices about who they're with and what they eat and what clothes they wear. And that's creating culture in real time. And I think more and more cities like Guangzhou and Shenzhen and Wuhan and all these places we're working understand that now, the importance of neighborhoods that allow people to express themselves in the way they live. Whereas living in a high-rise apartment, all the decisions have already been made for you by some marketing focus group. Well, personally, I don't want some focus group deciding how I live. So, this is a very interesting picture here. This family owned that home, that beautiful home. I guess that's the opium dealer, or one of those 2 guys. And those are the 2 sisters. That was in 1950. And they came back 12 years after Xintiandi opened, or 11 years later. They came back and had their picture made on the front steps. And then they brought their whole family. But beautiful house. And that's the before and after. That's when 17 families lived in it. That's when 1 family lived in it. Things change. People get married in Xintiandi. This was a special occasion where they picked 20 couples, and they all got married at the same time. It's probably taken about 10 years ago. I took that picture, actually. Yeah. And now in all of our projects, they become favorite places for people to get married. All the attendees, the Wuhan, the Shihu, the Foshan, Chongqing. Now we put wedding bells, but we put bell towers. And there's nothing traditional about a bell tower, it turns out. But now everybody thinks they're traditional because they want to ring the bell. So you can have you can change people's thinking by giving them something that they didn't know they needed. No one said to me, "I need a bell tower," but I figured if we create a bell tower, they'll use it, and they do. So we should go back now and add a bell tower to Xintiandi. All right. We're almost finished because a lot of this stuff is just pictures of other places we worked on for that same company. That's Hongqiao Tendi. So I think we're done. Okay. Thanks, guys, for coming along, and come up here, Emma.